Hey everyone, I'm Benjamin, and welcome to my book club. Today I'm going to try out a book tag that I've seen a few people do and that really interested me. I was specifically tagged in this one by Cliff over at Cliff's Dark Gems, so thank you very much Cliff for tagging me. And after watching his video, which was excellent and will be linked in the description below, I watched a few more people's tags for this one because it was really interesting to me. Originally created by ℙ𝕚𝕚𝕚𝕚, whose video will also be linked in the description below. This is the Don't You Forget About Me book tag, based around memory and, recollection of books. This interested me because I've often had a worry that I read too many books, or I read them fast enough, or that I wasn't reading properly, and that my retention and my recollection of the books I was reading wasn't fantastic. Starting off though, the very first prompt is the clean slate. This is talking about books that you know you've read, but you've really got no memory of. And I've got a few examples here. First off, these three books by Darcy Coates. The Haunting of Gillespie House, The Haunting of Ashbourne House, and The Haunting of Blackwood House. I've read one of these. I don't remember anything about what happened, and I don't remember which one of these it was. All I could tell you was there was a haunted house, which, based on the titles of all three of these, is not very helpful. I recall kind of enjoying it. I like haunted house books, so I should probably just pick one at random and read that one. But I'd hate to get halfway through and then suddenly remember everything that's about to happen. I do want to read some more Darcy Coates. There's a few Darcy Coates books that sound interesting. It appears as though they do haunted house books fairly often. But yeah, these Darcy Coates books, I've read one. I don't know which one. Up next is another haunted house book. Maybe I just don't remember haunted houses very well. The Grip of It by 𝕤𝕚𝕚𝕚𝕚. This guy. I remember DNFing this book. That's my only memory of this book. I remember I got a little bit of the way in and then I stopped reading it. I don't remember why. I don't remember anything about what happened in this book. And I'm worried because I remember DNFing it, but when I read the back cover, it sounds like it could be really good. Why didn't I like this book? Was it me? Was it the book? Has anyone read this? If anyone's read this, let me know. And finally, when I was going through my shelves looking at books, the last one that I remember looking at and being like, I read that. I even remember trying to track down the sequel, but having trouble because it was like really expensive or perhaps out of print or very rarely printed, and I didn't want to bother with the ebook for it. And that one is City Infernal by Edward Lee. It's like a teenage girl goes to hell, and that's all I remember. I don't remember anything else about this. I clearly liked it enough to look for the sequel, so it must not be terrible, but why don't I remember anything? Alright, prompt 2 is The Genie's Lamp, books you wish you could forget. And that's a bit mean. I don't know, I think even the bad books I've read don't deserve to be forgotten. I guess you could use it as a way to forget books so you could read them for the very first time. That could be fun, but I don't really think that's the spirit of the prompt. So a couple books that I read that I was very disappointed in. I suppose first would be A Sincere Warning About the Entity in Your Home. It sounded a lot cooler than it was. It's about a letter that arrives after you move into a new home, and it's describing to you the haunting and whatnot and how your house is haunted. And it was maybe just a bit long. It wasn't fantastically written. It wasn't super tense or interesting. The interesting thing, though, is apparently for quite a lot of money, you can get the author to print out a copy on just normal printer paper, replace all the names and locations and stuff with ones you provide, and then just ship it to a friend that's just moved into a new house, which is hilarious, but doesn't make the book much better. The issue is the book sounds really cool, so if I forgot it, I'd probably just read it again and be disappointed. And then I suppose the other one is I really like death game movies, like Saw, Escape Room, those sort of things. They're bad movies, but I really enjoy them. And I really like death game stories. There's a lot of them, a lot of good ones in manga. There's a couple ones I've read in novel form that have been okay. But for the most part, they don't seem to be particularly good. And so one I read and was pretty disappointed with was called The Housemates. It sounded kind of cool, like this Big Brother cross-death game kind of mix. But in the end, I came away feeling pretty disappointed. I don't really remember it that much, so I guess maybe that genie's already been Here we go, a more positive section. Books you think deserve more love. So books I've loved and remember loving that I think more people need to think about. And there's actually more than a couple here that I think are worth mentioning. First off, a couple of people saw it in my shelf review, but I do have a bunch of Animorph books. And don't get me wrong, these are definitely sort of preteen reading level. They're not super intense or anything, but they're a lot darker than I think those of us that read them as youngsters remember. At its heart, it's kind of like this story of children fighting this guerrilla war against alien invaders. And it never comes out with dark language or dark themes, but they're present. And I really enjoyed them. I've read, I want to say, about the first 20 so far. And I've really liked them, and I think they might be worth checking out if you want something really easy to read that's just a bit better than I think we all remember. And then up next is just Warhammer books in general. I understand not wanting to read themed IP books, right? You look at the Star Wars books or the Halo books or the Warhammer books and you just think that they're just kind of cheap cash grabs. And I think for the most part, that's not always true. There are a lot of bad Warhammer books, but there's also a lot of books here that aren't only good Warhammer books, they're just really good books. Some of my favourite books are the Night Lords trilogy by Aaron Dembski-Bowden, following these evil space marines who've been fighting this war against the good guys for, thousands of years. And you've got Titanicus by Dan Abnett, following these 100-meter tall robotic titans, these war machines. Double Eagle, also by Dan Abnett, this great sort of World War II fighter plane themed book. Not about World War II, obviously set in the Warhammer universe, but it very much feels like a World War II fighter pilot story. And these are just good books. These are books that I would suggest to people that don't read Warhammer, that just want a good sci-fi book. And there's so many of those in that series. And then finally, a book by an author I do see talked about a bit, but I see people talk about another one of their books. So the book I see everyone talk about is There Is No Anti-Memetics Division by Quantum. For good reason. This book is fantastic. S tier. I think I gave it a 10 out of 10. It's one of my favourite books of all time. But he's got a tiny short story collection, almost a micro story collection, that I think is even better. And that's Valuable Humans in Transit and Other Stories by Quantum. The short stories in this one have stuck with me so much. One in particular is written as almost this kind of Wikipedia article style, talking about the first human brain that is successfully ran virtually, and how immediately capitalism uses it to run tasks, and then there's kind of a usage guide on, how long you can run it before it degrades and stops performing well, and so you need to wipe it and restart. And it goes into digital minds that are good at controlling other digital minds, and it's just this bleak hellscape that I can't get out of my head, and I think more people need to read. And every story in that book is fantastic. And finally, books you'll never forget. There's lots of books here that I'll never forget, but I'm going to use this to talk about two books that I think about all the time. Books that a week doesn't go past without me lying in bed and remembering these books and thinking about them. The first is On the Beach. There is also a movie, I haven't seen that one, but this is about a group of survivors of nuclear war in Australia. So the nuclear war happened in the Northern Hemisphere, they weren't involved in it, they don't know what happened. All they know is that nuclear fallout is kind of coming down the globe towards them. The science is very iffy here, it's an old book. Perhaps this is how the science thought it would go back then, but even if it doesn't, you just accept it in the book and it's fine. But this is this bleak tale of people who know that their death is imminent and just kind of going through their daily lives and navigating these emotional turmoils. And I really think it's worth reading. It's very short, it's very quick, and it's one of the books that's had the most impact on me ever. I cried like a baby. And finally, the book that is just in my head constantly, whenever anyone talks to me about horror, this is the book I think of. Anyone talks to me about novellas, this is the book I think of. This is A Short Stay in Hell. This book is about a man who turns out he was worshipping the wrong religion, and he ends up being sent to hell, but not a really terrible fire and brimstone hell. He's just in a library, and this library has every possible book ever printed. So there'll be a book with every character as A, and then there'll be a book with every character as A except for the last one, which is B, and so on. And his job is, all of their jobs is just to find the book that tells the story of their life, and then they're free to go. And then it's the story about realizing how impossible a task that is. But it's still possible, so there's that glimmer of hope. You can't just give up and lead to despair. You have to keep trying because it is a solvable task. But is it? This is probably the scariest book I've ever read. It's not boo, jump out at you scary. It's not ghost story scary. It's not can't remember which haunted horror house story you read scary. It's just existentially dreadful sort of scary. This is like, oh, it's just such a good book and you need to read it. So there you go. 4 very quick, simple prompts. I really like talking about books like this. I like prompts that just let you, list 10 books and go with it. Let me know what you think in the comments below. I'd love to tag a couple channels that I've been watching recently and really enjoying. The first off is Books with Banks. If you're interested in Warhammer books, he's just started reading Warhammer books. Apart from that, he reads a lot of other stuff, and it's fantastic. And then also Jim's Books, Reading and Stuff, which is another fantastic channel that I'm sure if you're watching me, you've already watched Jim, but the off chance that you haven't, you should go check him out as well. And there you go. Thank you so much for everyone. If you want to see any of the other book tags I've done, the playlist should be coming up around here somewhere. And most of all, just keep reading.